All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunday Morning Live. I'm your host, Aaron Tomlinson. I'm running a little bit late again. And I'm going to have to share this again in the private group. I'm not sure why it's not streaming directly from the platform into the private group like it used to. So give me just a second to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, you might consider joining the private group. New Day Global is the name of the group on Facebook, and I'll put a link in the description later. Okay, I think I'm all set. Also not capturing the comments. I'm not sure if Restream changed something. It's probably me. Automatically assume when it comes to technological issues that I'm the problem because, well, experience has taught me that. Anyway, I hope everybody's doing good, getting ready for a good summer. I'm kind of excited about where things are at for me at the moment, spiritually in my life. Just feeling revived, feeling renewed. Some of the major challenges that I've been facing for the last couple of years have really resolved themselves. So I really feel like my fortunes are turning. Not that it's been bad, it hasn't been bad at all. There's just been significant challenges that me and my family have been facing for, I guess since the pandemic, since 2020. And it just feels like a lot of those things, most of them, if not all of them, have gotten resolved. And it just feels like things are smoothing out for us. And so really looking forward to future stuff. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on the woman at the well, talking about the woman at the well, my friend Derek Brown. His prophetic message to the earth right now is that the future of the church, specifically to the church, I guess, the future of the church parallels the story of Jesus and the woman in the well from John chapter 4. And so talked a little bit about life in the spirit. And John chapter 4 is definitely a passage that I used to preach on quite a bit. And so someone in the group went back and found an old message that I did really before when I was in the process of deconstructing, but a lot of my viewpoints have changed a little bit. But I always used to teach the woman at the well and just about anything in the Bible, but especially from the Gospel of John, with metaphor, as mythos, myth, metaphor, something that speaks to us, not a made-up story in the sense that it's a fairy tale, but a story that is told in such a way that the power of symbol, the power of metaphor is there to speak to the deeper structures of our consciousness in order to awaken us to spiritual realities or our spiritual potential. So instead of it being a literal story, historical story, or the emphasis and importance being on literally and historically what happened, the emphasis is on the symbol and the metaphor and the power of that to awaken something inside of us spiritually so that it speaks to every person and every generation and every situation in the present moment. And there is room for personal interpretation and personal application. So I understand that the Bible itself, when we're talking about the Bible, it's a very complex book. It's actually a library of many different books, and that there's not even a consistent purpose or theme or thread throughout all of them from Genesis to Revelation. And I realize there is that the authors are writing for political motivation, oftentimes religious motivation. It's very complex, but I do believe that we can take stories, any stories, and with the breath of the Spirit on it, and I'll explain a little bit more about that, what I'm talking about when I talk about spirit in a minute, that it can come alive metaphorically, it can come alive symbolically, it can come alive mythically, and speak to us and awaken something within us and speak to us in our present moment. And I believe that's where the power of scripture being inspired, that's where I believe the power of truth actually comes from. So in this former message that I did when I was teaching on the woman at the well, if you're not familiar with the story, in John chapter 4, Jesus meets a Samaritan woman, and he breaks through all these social barriers. There's a racial barrier there between the Jews and the Samaritans. There is racial or ethnic, is maybe a better term, but you get the picture. There was a gender issue and barrier that was there. There was also a religious one that was addressed. So religious barriers being broken down, gender barriers being broken down, ethnicity barriers being broken down, and Jesus connecting with the woman at the well. But he asks her a very interesting question. He says, go and call your husband and come here. Now, it gets interpreted husband because of the frames of the 20th century, the way we think about, the way the church, let me put it that way, the way the church thinks about marriage, relationships, sexuality, and stuff like that. There is no word in the Greek for husband. The word there is actually man. Go and call your man and bring him here. And she says, I don't have a man. And he says, you're right. You've had 5 men. And the one who you are with now is not your man. You've had 5 men. The one you're with now is not your man. And so the church scandalizes that. The Bible scandalizes that by trying to make this woman seem like nobody can tolerate her. Nobody can stand her. She's not with a husband now, and she's had 5 husbands, and nobody would put up with her. And she's with somebody now, but he won't even marry her. And that's how we kind of look at it. And so when I was teaching this in the past, I looked at this metaphorically, and I wasn't the first one to do it. There's a group of mystic Christians early on that looked at it this way. There was a group of French mystics that looked at it this way in the Middle Ages. That when Jesus refers to the 5 men, he refers to the 5 physical senses. And that part of the story is about transcending the 5 physical senses. And I'm sure I probably said in that message, I can't remember, but I might have said something like you need to divorce your 5 physical senses and come up higher into the spiritual senses in order to drink of the well of water that is within you. Because Jesus goes on and says, if you knew who it was that asks you, you would ask of him living water, and you would ask of him to drink, and he would give you living water, and out of your innermost being would flow, would be a well. There would be a well of water rising up in you that you could drink from anytime, so that you would not be thirsty. And then they go on and talk about the different religious systems, the temple up here, the temple over here, which denomination is right, which religious system is right, which path is right, is the east right or is the west right? And Jesus responds and says, you're not going to worship on either mountain, but the Father is looking for those that will worship him in spirit and in truth. And if I take you through the whole passage, you would see that there are many symbolic pointers in the passage that lead a person to comprehend that Jesus is trying, or the author is trying to shift us away from the physical only dimension of life. Now, I probably said when I was teaching it before, the physical dimension of life, but probably the best way to say it is that the author is trying to move us, and Jesus is trying to move us in the story off of the physical only map of life. So for most of us, especially, I think this speaks powerfully to us in the Western world, especially if we grew up in America, if we grew up under in academia, under scientific materialism, So much messaging is out there telling us that really the physical world, this physical life is all that there is. It's where it's at, etc., and so on. So on the one extreme, you have scientific materialism that is focused strictly on the physical environment, what can be observed, what can be measured, what can be repeated, etc., and so on. And then we're encouraged that to focus on the material aspects of life, on life out there, what's happening to us circumstantially, how we're feeling emotionally, mentally, how we're feeling in our bodies, etc., and so on. And so a lot of people, when they start getting into spirituality or religion, they can go almost to another extreme, to where this physical realm, this physical world doesn't have any value. It doesn't have any meaning. Your body, in the case of Christianity, your body is evil. In the case of Eastern mysticism and New Age spirituality, the ego is the problem, and we need to address the ego. And if we can address the ego, then we can eliminate suffering, etc., and so on. And in all these systems, these religious systems, my contention is that they make us something less than human. And they have a devaluing messaging towards aspects of our lives that make us human beings, whether it's our body and the flesh in Christianity, whether it's the ego and the self in Eastern paths of spirituality, or the incorporation, really the mutation, because it's not a full incorporation of philosophies. It's more like cherry picking of ideas out of Eastern philosophy and then bringing it over into Western lifestyle as sort of a mutation that then gets spun in New Age circles and things of that nature. I should probably leave that alone. Carl Jung, the great Carl Jung, was concerned about this when Eastern thought began to come over into Western thinking. And so it can create confusion for us. And I remember when I was in the church and I was in the faith movement, we would constantly hear, we would quote Smith Wigglesworth, really, who would say, was famously said, "I'm not moved by what I see. I'm not moved by what I feel. I'm not moved by what I hear." In other words, I'm not moved by my five physical senses. I'm only moved by what I believe. And that leaves us disconnected. So I don't like, for me, any philosophy. I don't recommend any philosophy to anyone that causes you to be less integrated, causes you to become less whole, less integrated. In other words, can the ego be a problem? Can the ego keep us in separation and keep us from experiencing oneness, or cause us to identify with opinions and ideas that then cause us to divide from one another? Can it cause us to identify with emotions and pain and stay stuck there, or situations in our life and stay stuck there? Yes, the ego is not without problem. The ego has a problem, but you cannot get through life without your ego. You just simply cannot do it. It would be impossible for you to live as a human being without your ego. So the idea is not to shed the ego or get rid of the ego, but to properly integrate the different aspects of the ego into wholeness, into congruence, into cooperation. So we're going to have desires for wealth, for material things. We're going to have desires for sexuality. We're going to have desires for, I'm trying to think of what the church deems evil. We're going to have fiery desires. Anger is going to be there. Sometimes anger is there to bring about change. Sometimes anger is there to help us set boundaries. So we're going to have jealousy. Jealousy can motivate us. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Jealousy can motivate us to improve our lives, or to do better, or to think about our lives and where we're at, and maybe the things that we want to change. And so I don't want to vilify any human experience or any emotion. Grief is necessary. Grief comes after loss, and grief helps us to transition from the life that we knew to the life that will be without the thing that we lost. Anxiety is a necessary part of life. Pain is a necessary part of life. Anxiety can keep us safe. Anxiety, according to studies, can help us perform. So I don't believe in legislating human experience or value judging human experience, whether we say this is fruitful and this is not fruitful, and we divide the experiences up, or whether we say this is a high vibration response and this is a low vibration response. We end up ranking our emotions and our human experiences on some kind of a moral hierarchy or spiritual hierarchy. And then we set out with spiritual goals to uh, uh, disown ourselves, to disintegrate ourselves, to fragment ourselves. And I don't hold to any of that. I think all of that can be psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually damaging. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. When you look at a lot of groups where East, West, New Age, and it's not just spiritual groups, it could be any group, but where there becomes a codependence upon a leader, a codependence upon a system, and you're not authentically and uniquely living out the life that you came here to live. It's how I've tried to articulate in the past the difference between right-hand path spirituality, which is the path of the sun, or a path of ascension into the sun, where we are consumed by fire and burnt up and consumed into the one, versus left-hand path spirituality, which is more of a nighttime spirituality, where we affirm that we are all stars with our own trajectory and course in life and our own light that needs to shine, and that our spiritual path is to find and fight for that specific path and light and purpose and thing that we came here to do, realizing that our ego, our emotions, all of our emotions, the full gambit of it, our experiences are all part of the tools that we use in order to express our unique light and follow our unique path. And that's the type of spirituality that I find inspiring and I think needs to be talked about more. So back to this thing with the woman at the well, and not the physical only. So on the one hand, you have the scientific materialist, the atheist, who is physical only. This life is all there is. And then you have on the other extreme, people who want to lead us into spiritual paths and spiritual ecstasy and spiritual ascension at the expense of our mission, our purpose, our humanity, these human experiences that we came here to have, that again can leave us in many ways lacking in our lives, because we turn on ourselves and make aspects of ourselves enemies to ourselves that never, I don't think, were ever intended to be that way. All right, so when I'm talking about spirit, let's come back and talk about this. When I'm talking about spirit, what am I talking about? So I have come to a place where I'm very comfortable after deconstructing from conservative, charismatic Christianity adherence, blind faith to the Bible, blind faith adherence to the Bible, and taking a brief stay within what might be called New Age spirituality and exploring that for a few years, exploring a number of different other paths of Western spirituality, the Western esoteric wisdom tradition, other aspects of spirituality, and then being confronted with arguments of atheism and scientific materialism by a number of my friends who were going down that path, to researching philosophy, listening to guys that I think are major thought leaders today, like Dr. Donald Hoffman, Dr. Bernardo Castro would be two of the most, not the only, but two of the most influential. And their concepts and ideas about idealism and consciousness being fundamental to reality. I've almost in a way come full circle. So here's where I'm at in the present moment today and how I'm choosing to go forward. I think Joe Machuda, if you're in the New Day Global group, Joe Machuda did a video. I hope you posted that, Joe, on abundance and provision and a structure and a construct for that. I would really encourage you to go out and watch that. But I keep coming back to, I think the most solid for me philosophy of life or metaphysical understanding of the world really does come from the Western esoteric tradition. And without getting too complex, the idea in the Western esoteric tradition is that that God does exist as the creator, as the source of all things, as unlimited eternal energy or light. The Ein Sof Or it is called in the Hebrew. And that this energy, this light, this thing that is beyond really our comprehension as human beings, decided to become, to diversify itself, to not remain in this sort of oneness state, but to diversify itself on various different levels and dimensions of existence until it manifested itself in the physical universe. So this is what they call, from the Western esoteric tradition, the one, the all. This is really where the idea of the Trinity comes from in the Church Fathers, the Logos, the Son. The difference is that for the Church Fathers, creation was done ex nihilo, out of nothing. And so the idea is that God is other than his creation, in the sense that the painter is not the painting. This idea in the Western esoteric tradition is more the idea of an emanation. So it would be as though this source, this one consciousness diversified and emanated out and became creator and creation. So that everything that we see is all part of the divine. But it has many different layers and dimensions and aspects to it that are unseen, so that everything has consciousness attached to it. That's one level. Consciousness is one level. Spirit is one level. Energy is one level, if you can think about it that way. So there is, to a rock, there is a spirit component to the rock. There is a conscious component to the rock. There is, in some traditions, even an angelic component to the rock. And then there is the rock itself. So this is the structure, the context in which people will use crystals in some way to benefit, whether it's used to absorb negative energies or shield against negative energies, whether it's used in some kind of healing or some kind of divination or something like that. It's because the belief is that there is a consciousness and a spirit and an energy in the rock itself that cannot be seen or accessed by our 5 physical senses in this body. Now, I do actually believe that. So in the crystal or in the rock, that consciousness is very basic. But in the human being, it is very complex. So we are in the image of God because we are of the one. There is a way of thinking about this in which we are all one, because we all come from the same source, or we all are the same source. We all are aspects of divinity. However, there is also the diversity within it. In other words, the dividing of lights, like think stars, the dividing of lights, so that your light, you are a point of divine energy and divine consciousness and spirit right now. That at your deepest levels or at your highest levels is a aspect, a spark of the divine, a light, an energy, a consciousness, a spirit that is divine. And because it is divine, it has always been. But it is divided or dissociated or split off from the rest of the consciousness so that you have it's split off or divided enough that you have an individual sense of being, an individualized sense of awareness. I love Bernardo Kastrup calls it a dissociative boundary. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a boundary that can be crossed. It can be crossed. This idea of being absorbed into the one isn't a eternal absorption to where you just become a drop that goes back into the ocean, or you become a spark that goes back into the fire. You become an aspect that becomes interactive, that can go in and out. You can cross at various different times that dissociative boundary. You can experience aspects of oneness with the one or divine union with God, but you never lose that sense of individuation either. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to experience oneness. I've tried to get this across for 4 years, but it's just, to me, it's so basic and common sense. If I can say I experience oneness, there's an I there. There's an ego there. There's an individuation there. I experienced this oneness. How did you know you were experiencing it if there was not still individuation, if there was not still an experiencer there? The fact that you had an experience means that it wasn't actual oneness in the way people talk and think about oneness. So anyway, I'll let that go. Let me come back to the physical senses. So we need to understand that we did come here as light beings, as spirit beings, as divine beings, as sons and daughters of God, that our parent is the one, the consciousness, that we are offspring and offshoots of that one consciousness, and that we came here for the purpose of being a human being and learning about and engaging this physical world and this physical dimension. And that while we're here, we need to fully embrace it. We need to fully embrace nature and all of its aspects. We need to try to live in harmony with that. We need to try to live in harmony with all the various different parts of our humanity, including all of the experiences that I just talked about. We need to fully embrace this experience. We need to not see it as a prison. We need to not see it as a punishment. We need to not see it as something that we're trying to escape from or trying to get out of or trying not to come back to by working out all of our karmic stuff. Remember, most philosophies, Eastern and Western, and religions come from a time that was really, really horrible to be a human being, where being a human being was mostly like a sentence in hell. As we were evolving and growing into what we have become. But it's not that way anymore. So, of course, these philosophies about karma and some of these other things were really rooted in how do we end this suffering? But I think we need to progress past that. I mean, come on, man. Are we going to be beholden to medical science from thousands of years ago and start going back to some of the things that they did then? Are we going to be beholden to traveling the way they traveled back then? Are we going to be beholden to what they knew about diet and nutrition back then? Then why do we have to, and why do we think, and why do we make sacred and holy ancient scriptures or ancient ideas and ancient philosophies that are completely uprooted from their cultural background, that are completely uprooted from the world in which they originated, and not understand that as divine beings, as light beings, as aspects of the divine, that we need to progress philosophically, and that it's okay, and that there needs to be spiritual evolution, there needs to be spiritual progress, and there needs to be progress in how we interact and think about spirituality and how we express ourselves as spiritually divine human beings, and stop being beholden to ideas like karma, just like we stop being beholden to ideas like animal sacrifice from the Bible. Stop being beholden to the idea that desire is bad and attachment is bad and ego is bad, because that is a philosophy that, again, is a tree that's uprooted out of its cultural and philosophical context. We don't have to be beholden to those things. We can draw from them, we can grow from them, we can develop out of from the wisdom of those things. But to stay stuck there, to me, doesn't make any sense at all. I think it's total foolishness. Now, I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just saying, think with me. You don't do this in any other aspect of your life. You don't want a doctor operating on your child who's using medical or surgery techniques from 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So why do you want to invest the most important part of your life, your eternal aspects of yourself? Why do you want to give up aspects of yourself? Why do you want to deny yourself things like desires or attachments or whatever the case may be, in order to try to live a life that was suitable for back then, instead of advancing and updating your spiritual, internal, mental, emotional, spiritual, and philosophical software for a time that is right now, so that we can come together and realize the ages are shifting anyway. We are moving from the age of Pisces and all that it was about into the age of Aquarius, and we don't know what it's like. And so there does need to be, I believe, a clarion call for a new coming together of the minds, for a new expression of divine humanity and a new expression of spirituality coming into the earth in this time. So it is not a spirituality that is devoid of human experience, that is devoid of desire, that is devoid of attachments and things like this. It is one where we can ascend into the higher realms of our being. Because remember, I said this one stepped itself down in stages into physical material reality. So whether you're awake to it or not, or you realize it or not, every single human being has higher aspects of themselves. You have higher aspects to yourself in higher realms that contain packets of the divine mind, divine wisdom, and intuition, that contain packets of divine energy to help you raise your vibration or to give you resources in order to live this human experience, not to get out of it, not to escape it, but to integrate those things into it. And this is what Jesus, I believe, was talking about when he talked about if you'll drink from me, that you will find this well of water. In other words, there are depths and dimensions of your being and my being, where there can be a spiritual unfolding of the mind of God. There can be a spiritual unfolding of the energy of God within us, that we can access these higher aspects and realms and dimensions of ourselves. However, this is only for those who can accept fully that these dimensions and these realms exist. Because if you say, oh, that's just foolishness, there's nothing to that, you can't prove that, I'm not going to accept that, I'm not going to believe that, then you have no means. You've already said no. You have set your intention and your will to say, I will not access this well. I will not access these dimensions. I will not access these places within myself. So that's why they're not available to those who don't believe. It's not a reward system. Oh, you have to believe it in order to give it. It is a consciousness system, and a system that is based on intention and willpower, so that if you say no to it, you won't access it. You won't have it. Go back to some of the teaching that I've done on the invisible gorilla to understand why that's so. So you have to accept this. You have to accept the reality of this. You have to accept that there is territory out there, and territory within you, and territory in the higher realms of your being that you may not have experienced yet, that are unseen, unmeasurable, but still real. That's the first step. If you don't believe it, forget about it. So it's believing in it in order to access it. And then the second part of it is this. It's understanding, and this is where the 5 physical senses come in. The 5 that you had were not your husband, or however it's said. The one you have now is not your man. In other words, you have to be willing to embrace and awaken the psychic senses, frankly. The psychic senses, spiritual senses, internal senses. Not the imagination, but the imaginal. Scholars make a distinction between that. It's very similar. If I tell you to access a memory about anything, favorite birthday party, favorite anniversary party, favorite vacation, you're going to have sensory remembrance of that. You may see what you saw then. You may hear something that you heard then. You may even kind of smell or feel something that you felt then. That's akin to spiritual senses. So when the spiritual senses, so what we're doing is we are learning how to reach out with the human aura, really. Learning how to reach out with the human aura and open up to the higher realms and higher dimensions of our own divine being, of our own higher self, of what Paul called Christ in you, what Jesus called that well of water that is within you. And as we expand, as we learn to expand and we learn to open up to that, then as we begin to access it, we can receive divine packets of informations and downloads. That does not mean that our five physical senses are lying to us. That does not mean that we deny our five physical senses. That does not mean, like we used to say in the faith movement, I'm not moved by what I see or what I feel or what I think. All of that is just input. In other words, we need to look at the senses not as governors in any way, shape, or form, whether they be physical senses or they be spiritual senses. They should not be in the executive branch of our lives. They should be our advisors. In other words, we should have, if we really want to live this left-hand path spirituality, then we need to be able to develop an executive self. And that executive self is the self that's in charge. So in other words, we develop enough temperance in our lives that we are not pulled off track by anything other than this executive informed self. So in other words, here's what I mean. We don't allow our emotions to pull us and guide and lead our decisions. We don't allow our rational mind to guide and lead our decisions. We don't allow our five physical senses to guide and lead our decisions. We do not, well, I shouldn't say guide or lead, to lead, because there's a difference. Let me rephrase that. Let me come back. We do not allow them to lead. We do not allow our emotions to lead a decision. We do not allow our rational mind to lead a decision. We do not allow our intuition to lead a decision. We do not allow our spiritual senses, our five physical senses. These are all our advisors. So in that sense, they are our guides. These are our advisors. In other words, we want to try to live life from a place of will, from a place of the executive self, so that the executive self is developed, so that we take input from our five physical senses and we take it seriously. We take input from our rational mind and we take it seriously. We take input from our emotions and we take it seriously. We take input from our intuition and we take it seriously. We take input from the mind of God or spirit guides or other people. All of it we take into consideration. All of it is valuable. All of it is important. All of it consists of various different data points that we can look to in order to give us guidance and give us information. And so, Debbie, the person who asked the question, I hope you see this. I hope this helps. I hope this helps you guys understand what I'm, a little bit about where I'm at and what I'm talking about when I talk about life in the spirit. So life in the spirit is not, just to be clear and sum this up, life in the spirit is not life outside of the flesh or life outside of the physical body or life outside of the physical realm. Life in the spirit does not even say that the spiritual aspects of ourselves are not egalitarian with this life, with this physical life. In other words, it's not to say that one's more important than the other or one supersedes the other. There's a blending, there's a cooperation and collaboration and interaction between the two, a shared life, if you will, between the two that comes together in an integrous whole. That's the goal. That's the goal. So when I'm talking about life in the spirit, I'm saying it's not other than life in the flesh or life in the physical realm, or life in this world, or life in this body, or life with an ego, or life with emotions that you don't like and we call low vibration. It's a beautiful weaving together of those things. But in order for it to be life in the spirit, it can't be all physical. It can't be all material. There has to be an openness to the higher realms and higher dimensions of our being, where this whole other aspect of life can be experienced, but it's not experienced always with the five physical senses or accessed. It can influence and touch the five physical senses, but there has to be a belief in it, and there has to be an exercising of those senses. There has to be a purging and a cleaning out, oftentimes, of the mind and the emotions. That is an inward process that takes place, sometimes in therapy, sometimes in meditation, sometimes just with a good friend. There's that cleansing process, and then there's the exercising of the spiritual senses, sometimes through a daily practice of just listening for downloads and information coming to you, learning how to open up and expand your spirit body, your energy body, your aura. We can get into all of those things at another time. I've got another obligation today that I'm going to have to end this a little bit early. I know I got started late. So just a short little teaching here on life in the spirit. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you appreciate what we're doing, please consider supporting us with either one-time donation or a monthly donation using the PayPal link that's in the description. So again, this is Aaron Tomlinson with Sunday Morning Live, coming to you. If you're watching on YouTube, Conscious Spirituality, please think about subscribing, hitting the like button, hitting the notification bell, all that stuff. And look forward to being with you next week. And thanks, everybody. And please, again, let me know what you think in the comments. And I'm looking forward to doing more teaching along these lines. So anyway, God bless.